there's not a lot written on developmental phases over the age of, say, 25. Youth has its charms. There's a lot about youth that drags us to hell. We have these handcuffs to expectations. We overly give away our power to peers. If we allow ourselves to enter healthy, mature developmental phases, then we can shed some of these things that have ripped us, and we let them.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So today on the podcast, we want to introduce another framework, another mental model to you today if you're watching or listening. Obviously, Personality Hacker, we talk a lot about personality types. We've talked about the Enneagram, but mostly we stick with the Myers-Briggs system or the Jungian cognitive functions, that's a mouthful, of understanding ourselves and the way that we move through the world. And one thing that you and I, Antonia, in our lives have really, I don't want to use the word depended on, but we've utilized a lot.
Benefited from.
That's a great word. Not just the Myers-Briggs system, which is a way to help us understand each other and our differences between people. And we kind of see that as an equal playing field, right? There's 16 types. Besides ENFP, my preferences. No type is above any other type. I'm joking. Clearly, where we see them all as equal. It's just a way to understand differences between people.
Right.
And one could actually call that a horizontal model of understanding, right? If we have mental models and frameworks that we carry in our heads, and that's a nice horizontal, meaning that there's no hierarchy to it. There's no better personality type than some other. If you're an ENFP, you need to work on yourself and become an INTJ.
Right.
Like, that's the better place to go. There's no progression or where to go with it. This is just say, this is who you are, and there's some development you can do in your type, but you shouldn't become something else. That's just who you are in this horizontal framework.
Yeah. Horizontal frameworks are great for understanding differences, and there's no type that's empirically better than any other type, meaning that it might be contextually better. Like there are certain...
Like talents or attunements.
Yeah. We have contextual talents that we bring depending upon type, and type helps us understand those. But there's no type that's like empirically better than any other type.
Yeah.
And so horizontal models help us understand differences between things.
Not necessarily a sequence of something in that.
Right.
The other kind of model, we've introduced this before. We, in fact, did podcasts on more horizontal versus vertical, and I want to introduce this idea of a vertical model again today. A vertical model, and let's just take something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Safety, or it's survival, safety and security, love and belongingness, self-esteem, self-actualization. These are levels or layers that stack on each other. So you can't have love and belongingness if your life is threatened, as an example. So you have to have baseline establishment. I can survive, then you have to have safety and security, and then you can have love and belongingness, right? It progresses in a need base.
Yeah, well, you're not going to care. If your survival is being threatened, you're not really worried about whether or not your spouse left the cap off the toothpaste, right? Like that's not really...
Some people are. They see it as survival, like a battle royale.
Right.
Depends on the person, but yeah, I get your
But it would, like arguments and things that are considerations and love and belongingness, that is not really being taken into consideration when you're trying to, say, put food on your table or just live through a war or whatever.
Yeah. But these vertical models and frameworks that we've introduced here on the show are very powerful because they can help us set expectations for ourselves and others, kind of what's coming down the pike. It can point to needs that are there. It can point to work to be done, actual like improvement or skill to build, or things to go away from and other things to go toward. It gives us a lot of map and process and things we can use to develop ourselves as humans.
Right. Well, and when we're looking at our type, as a vertical model of understanding, when we're looking at our specific type and we go, well, there's a vertical nature within the type itself. Like not every person with ENTP preferences is at the same level of maturity as all the other ENTPs.
Yeah.
So there is a vertical nature when you zoom into specific types. So type is a horizontal model when it comes to just understanding the flavors, but when you zoom in, there's advantage to seeing vertical progression within. Yeah. And so what vertical models do is they allow us, like you said, they give us sort of a roadmap for what's coming next. Because a vertical model we've introduced on the podcast multiple times is spiral dynamics. And there's basically a principle in spiral dynamics called the pre-trans fallacy. And the pre-trans fallacy is that when you're at a certain level of development and somebody is at a higher level of development than you are, you can't see what you have not yet experienced yourself, especially in terms of being able to take in that much cognitive territory. And so what ends up happening is you end up seeing characteristics that might remind you of earlier phases, and you basically take the person at higher level than you and you put them at a lower level than you, right? It's called the pre-trans fallacy. You're not there yet. You haven't transformed or transcended to this next space. And so all of those characteristics appear to be less developed, not more developed.
Yeah.
So when you have a vertical model, what ends up happening is you can, and of course, when you do the pre-trans fallacy, in some ways you resist going to that because you think it's an earlier developmental level, not the next developmental level.
Yeah.
But if you have a vertical model that goes, no, those characteristics are actually what's coming next, then as opposed to resisting it, thinking that you're seeing something that you've already visited, you can see those characteristics and go, oh, that's actually what I'm heading towards. And so they're like cairns or mile markers down the road of development. Yeah. And so vertical models are super helpful for, like you just said, telling us where we're going, setting expectations of what's coming next. And they also help us see levels that maybe not everybody gets to. Yeah. Right? Because there are some developmental levels that are not, they're available to all humans, but not all humans take advantage of them. Yeah. Yeah.
And a basic one, I could just give you this as a meta frame, and I think this will dovetail into what we want to talk about today. A basic one is you could take an 80-year-old life. Let's say the average human lives about 80 years, and you could divide this into about 20-year segments. And you could say 0 to 20 years old is childhood development and the developmental phase.
Adolescence.
Childhood and adolescence. 20 to 40 is early adulthood. Right? You're in your adulthood, you're establishing your life, you're finding out who your partner's going to be, are you going to have kids or not, how are you going to establish your family system, what are you going to do for a career, you're establishing a lot of things. And then the next 20 years, 40 to 60, could be seen as midlife, a little bit of a reset moment. There's a more shadow work in a Jungian way available to us. We can do a lot of reflection. Okay, the first 40 years of my life, what do I want to do for the next 40? And do some reset there. And there's almost like a second, I wouldn't say adolescent, but almost a second awakening that can happen in the midlife. And then we get into elderhood, 60 to 80 and beyond. And that's kind of a way to see it. Lives go longer or shorter depending on the individual, but that's a rough way to see a developmental model of 4 basic phases that a human life goes through. And we can all kind of see that pattern, whether you quibble about the exact years and times, and maybe there's 5 phases, not 4. I think most humans, no matter if they're into these kinds of things or not, would agree, yeah, I see a basic pattern to how a human develops over and over again throughout history.
Yeah. And what's important is in those later developmental time periods, like you talked about midlife and elderhood, the challenge that I found is that there's not a lot written on developmental phases over the age of, say, 25. And that's
all over. Yeah. 25, you're on your own.
That's it. You're done. No, it's like there's that common, sort of understanding that at around the age of 25, our brains are quote unquote fully developed or fully mature. Yeah. And after that, there's not much written on the developmental phases that go on in our adulthood. So we're very focused on adolescent development, and probably because a lot of those are sort of biologically kicked off, right? We're entering new phases physically, which create new opportunities and new access to different, balances of neurotransmitters and hormones, and all of that massively affects our cognitive developmental phases as well. After 25, though, we don't really hear much about it. And even though we would say, yeah, there's a time period of life called midlife, or there's a time period of life called elderhood, we don't think of those as transformative developmental phases. We don't think of like midlife as like a second puberty. And there are some people who have written about it. I would say Carl Jung is one of the few people that really talk about how midlife is basically this massive opportunity for development that we don't really have access to in the same way when we're younger.
Except for the baby boomers. Like in the 80s, there were all these movies about like midlife crises.
Yeah.
Like the red sports car with the blonde woman, the dude that's going through his like midlife crisis. We still have these stories now too. I remember as a child, this happening all like this over the hill party, midlife crisis. It kind of was a thing, at least for our parents' generations and before us. I don't think our generation and younger generations tuned into this as much. Yeah. But it seems like there was kind of some awakening around being midlife back then.
Yeah, there probably was. I think, though, that it wasn't handled with a lot of care. I think this idea of midlife crisis is a thing to be laughed at, or people see it with derision. And who was it recently said, it's not a midlife crisis, it's just midlife. It's like there's a time period there where we have a lot of developmental opportunities presented to us. But if we think we're just going through a crisis, like that's almost like going through a midlife crisis is pathetic. Like you're trying to reclaim your youth. And as if youth is the ultimate prize. And once we lose it, we'll do everything to gain it back. Now that I'm well into midlife, I'm not even entering it. I'm like fully in there. I'm realizing how much I don't really care about youth. Like when I had it, when I thought it was one of my most valuable assets, when I thought time in front of me and youthful appearance and youthful opportunities were some of the most important things.
Yeah.
I'm now, I kind of shrug my shoulders at youth at this point, because youth does not provide a lot of opportunities for, say, wisdom or discernment, which have become very valuable assets to me at this time period in my life. And so the idea of a midlife crisis being only about this desire to grab onto youthfulness, there's definitely some elements in there, but I think midlife is way more than that. And so to bring it down to a crisis of fleeting youthfulness, and that's all it is, and we should have derision for that experience, I find to be to sort of cartoonize a time period in one's life that might be, I mean, now that I'm in it, this is an incredibly rich time period. This is a time period that, I mean, in some ways, I'm glad that I prepared for it as much as I did, and not really intentionally prepared for it. There's a lot here that's very complicated and difficult. I have young children and I have aging parents. And that's one of the things about midlife, is that you're in what you and I have called the squeeze, right? It's like both generations below us and above us are reliant on us in some ways. And so that's a challenge. There are things that are happening with my body, that almost feel like a second puberty, but it's going the other direction now, right? And so there's a lot of things here, but does that mean that I just have to sort of hand myself over to decline and I just have to be used to that?
Heck no.
Or is there a lot of richness of awareness of self available here? Yeah. And so what I like about vertical models, especially the ones that focus in on developmental phases that take into account later time periods, or, like midlife, is it reminds us, first of all, that youth has its charms, but it's like once you're past it, in some ways there's a new lease on life, right? Because there's a lot about youth that drags us to hell. We overly give away our power to peers. We think that we have to have all of these, success stories that we may or may not have earned, and we use them in a persona way. We use them as like rights, or tickets of entry. We beat ourselves up if other people are ahead of us. Like there's so many things that in youth we get sort of we have these handcuffs to expectations that I think in midlife we start to reevaluate. And if we allow ourselves to enter healthy, mature developmental phases, then we can shed some of these things that have gripped us, sort of gripped us, and we let them. So we gave our wrists over to have handcuffs put on them. Yeah. And then we just kind of go oh, I don't have to do that anymore, which is really fabulous. So to get to the subject and not to just talk about the delights of midlife,
vertical models.
And let's go back to vertical models and the point of why we're talking.
I'll title the podcast as Vertical Models and the Delights of Midlife.
The delights of midlife.
No one would click on it.
Yeah.
Wait, what? What does it even mean?
We want to talk about a vertical model that I ran into recently about the 5 stages of development that include stages that people don't always reach in this lifetime. Now, if you're already familiar with vertical models, they're going to sound similar to other vertical models. They're going to kind of sound a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or a little bit like maybe there's going to be some crossover with, say, concepts around spiral dynamics, or anything that talks about phases up. Now, unlike Maslow's hierarchy, though, what's nice, the good and the bad thing about Maslow's hierarchy is it's not something you set and forget. When you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if you're unfamiliar with the model, we've done whole podcasts on it in the past. There are 5 different levels, and we come in and out of them all the time. You might be
contextually.
Yeah. You might be in the top level of self-actualization, but if a war breaks out in your country, you're back into survival regardless of how you're feeling internally.
Or somebody carjacks you driving home from the theater.
You got it.
You're right back in survival.
Yeah, or you get a really like a devastating health diagnosis, right? Or suddenly you're in the middle of a divorce, right? And now you're in love and belongingness, or maybe you lose your job and now you're in safety and security. So Maslow's hierarchy is not like I've established this and now I'm graduating to the next level and it's like set. It helps us understand why we, like when we get into contextual situations, why other considerations get dropped. And then once we establish those contextually, then we graduate onto the next one. So it's kind of like a scales that we go up and down on.
Well, it's hierarchy of needs. So once the need is met, we don't need to meet it anymore.
Yeah.
If it's not met, we got to go back and meet it. I mean, it's basically very contextual. It's in the moment. It's responsive. It's a responsive vertical model.
It's a responsive vertical model.
It's not as developmental as it is responsive, probably.
Exactly. And when you look at developmental models or hierarchical models like Graves' model or spiral dynamics, while we are in a core level, we are also stratified as people. So it helps us understand like which parts of us might be at lower developmental levels and which ones are at higher, and which is one I live in. And how does that help me understand my relationship to the world around me and the difference between my level and it's, my community's level or whatever.
Probably when you're younger, you're more interested in horizontal models. And as we age, we go, oh, wait, there's this vertical model thing. I was just thinking, like, when I was young, I was way more interested in, like, the distinctions between people and, like personality type things, right? But the older I get, these models give me a description of where I've come from and kind of give me a path of where I'm headed. And they tell me where I am now on this timeline of sorts. I find them very useful as I age.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they're helping me, again, my question always, whenever I look at a model of development, I always ask myself, where am I leaving money on the table? Like what is available to me that I'm not tapping into?
Yeah.
And what's great about a good hierarchical model is it'll tell you, you have an opportunity to go to this phase. You just need some language and maybe a little bit of definition around what that looks like. So then you can do more of a straight shot to it as opposed to accidentally trip into it.
Yeah.
And I found in my early phases, I was accidentally tripping into things. Once I recognized the value of a good, hierarchical model or a vertical model, I was able to like get to those places with a little bit, more intention and less time. So speaking of that, we want to introduce a vertical model called the 5 stages of development that was developed by Robert Kegan. Now, Robert Kegan was a Harvard psychologist, a developmental psychologist that wrote a couple books, most notably The Evolving Self and In Over Our Heads. And he developed this vertical model based on some research, but also some clinical work. And his big question was basically, how is adulthood not a fixed state, right? Like, how is it not that after 25 we just stop developing, right? What's available to us in our ongoing psychological growth? And he discovered these 5 different phases. There's actually 6. One is like phase 0, which is, sort of not pre-cognitive, but we're just going to go ahead and abandon that one. And we're going to start with the first one. Okay. And we're going to talk about these 5 different stages. He also calls them orders. And I think there are more clinical ways of describing all of this, but I think I'm going to use some of the easier terminology that I've heard him use in like talks. And so I'll give a nod to the more clinical version, but I think we should probably stick with the more sort of accessible language around them.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I 100% ratify that.
All right. So the 5 stages or orders of development are the first order, which they oftentimes call first order, but more casually is called the impulsive mind. The second one is technically the instrumental mind, but the more sort of, more accessible way of looking at it is sort of like the imperial mind. So the first order is impulsive. The second is imperial.
We don't need to make, you can probably, give the technical here, but we don't have to do that throughout the whole show.
No, we're going to talk about them. The first order is impulsive and the second is imperial.
Gotcha.
The third is the socialized mind. The fourth is the self-authoring mind. And the fifth is self-transforming mind. And the only distinction, and the reason why I'm going to go with Imperial, is that the big difference between instrumental and Imperial is basically one is more seeing how we use people, which is the instrumental, versus how we can see things in terms of power, which would be more the Imperial mind. So we're going to talk about it more in terms of power, but we can kind of go back and forth. So those are the different phases. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go into each of these, describe them a little bit, when they come online, how they do, what are the advantages to doing, like having like a thorough exploration of each of these orders or stages. What are some of the things that might hold us back, right? Like keep us from going to the next phase and sort of keep us stuck. And then, and if we have time, maybe we can talk about an exercise one can do to go from one of these to the next.
Okay.
All right.
So let's jump into the first one.
All right. Sounds good.
So this is the impulsive mind.
Correct.
Let's jump in. What does this mean?
The first order. So the impulsive mind is usually seen in early childhood. So this is a developmental phase that happens early on. And it's marked by concrete thinking and immediate sensory awareness. That's what dominates. It's impulsive, right? So experience is driven on impulses and emotions. As mentioned, it's immediate and sensory. And it carries with it a limited ability to see one as separate from emotions. So it's impulsive because my emotions are me. Right. And so what I want, what I desire, what I have a draw towards, what I have an impulse towards, those are all the things that are basically my definition of myself. That's my worldview, is what I want. Right.
Yeah. And I can see this being important maybe for motivation and understanding what I want. I mean, this is an important part. We can't stay here, but it's important that we have this part of ourselves. And even the concrete of it. Sometimes I feel like I have a deficiency here. I'm so abstract all the time. Like, oh yeah, I can just do that one. That's a very simple, like logical thing I can do right here in front of me. More just see it and do it. Don't overthink it, Joel.
Yeah, exactly. So the advantages to having a thorough exploration of this order or stage is to your point. There's an authenticity of expression there, and particularly of experience. There's not a lot of rationalization that's being done. There's a lot more of a direct relationship between one's experience and how that experience made a person feel or how they're reacting and responding to it, as opposed to having to put it through layers of abstraction and layers of rationalization. And the advantage to that is sometimes we get caught up in our own stories, right? We can get really caught up in stories. And this developmental phase reminds us that you can just have an experience and it doesn't have to have a complicated story that comes along with it.
Yeah. And it also brings exploratory learning with it. This idea of, I mean, there's a benefit to not thinking about the implications of my actions, because then I'm more experimental with my actions. I don't fear the consequences as much. I'm more impulsive. And so I'm testing and trying things. And when you're young, that's really important. If a baby's like, well, I don't know if I want to start walking. If I start walking, I might fall. Maybe I shouldn't start the whole project. It would limit development, but a baby doesn't give a crap. Like they're 18 months. I don't know when they start walking, 12, 18 months. I even had 3 kids. I forget. They start walking around. And it's like they're falling and bumping into stuff and trying to run out in traffic and all this stuff. And you're like, no, don't do that.
Yeah. It's usually a little earlier than that, but yeah.
Be more, not running in traffic. I think that's more like
running in traffic is definitely a toddler time period.
Yeah, that's that's basically a defining characteristic of toddlers, in my opinion.
Do they get to live past their toddler years? That gets known, and whether or not they run in traffic.
Vigilance, but they can't be thinking about. I mean, the reason they're running into traffic is because they're not thinking about implications at all.
Right.
And as children, I think that's really important, and we miss that when we get to adults. Sometimes we need to tune back into some of this energy.
Yeah.
Because we're fearing, well, if I experiment with that, look at all the people in the office are going to think low of me.
Right.
If I take these risks, if I experiment with something.
Right. Yeah. And the advantage to that is rapid learning. You learn fast.
Lots of reps.
Yeah. Giving yourself permission to take risks, giving yourself permission to do things a little sloppy, just for the curiosity of it, means that you're going to be learning very quickly. Another advantage to this phase is that because you're not doing a bunch of rationalization, just like little kids, right? They give themselves permission for emotional expression. So they can also get much faster awareness of one's emotional needs. So this is that early phase where like you bump you scrape your knee, you cry. When you're really little, you're hungry, you cry. You're tired, you cry. Like everything kind of gives you this expression of emotion that gets you really in tune to what your needs are. The older we get, and we'll talk about some later developmental phases, we get socialized out of that. And so some of us are just really bad at knowing what our needs are at all. We've been so socialized out of this direct emotional expression, and we're always hyper aware of everybody else that we don't really even know what's going on for us. So being able to tune back into this phase of development means being able to tune back into like what your actual legitimate needs are. And that's something that is easy to get lost.
Yeah.
And then I think also there's a lot of flexibility and adaptability here. If you don't have a lot of stories running about how things have to happen, then you can pivot quickly. And finally, this time period is also, this is the time period where we learn emotional regulation. We have a lot of emotional expression, but because we're allowed to have emotional expression, or if we are, then over time, we also learn how to self-soothe. We learn how to regulate our own emotional experience. And so being so raw, like there's a rawness to the instinctive time period, that rawness allows us to sit with our own emotions. And, sometimes we cry out for something we don't get to have. And then we've got to figure out how we're going to deal with that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big lessons that gets learned in this phase.
And then I think there's proactive things we could do to move into the next phase, but mostly I think the natural order of humans is going to be moving on, except there's a few circumstances or contexts that might stop you from developing out of this phase. And we've met maybe people that are stuck here. That would be neglect or trauma, severe emotional invalidation, meaning people not tuning into your emotions or validating that you felt this way at all. Even if they're helping you overcome it, they need to at least validate you felt that way. So just ignoring it or pushing it away. Or chronic overstimulation, like too much opportunity to experiment and it's just constant. You don't get a chance to like integrate the lessons ever.
Yeah.
To actually get to the next level.
Well, it's that overstimulation without the emotional regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I fear for younger people who are used to constant and perpetual unearned dopamine hits, right?
With tough.
With devices and just being able to scroll through things that are like designed for 30 to 60 seconds to just give a dopamine hit perpetually. Yeah. There's a lot of overstimulation that comes with that without emotional regulation. And so that's something that even if your parents otherwise, you didn't go through massive trauma or you weren't massively invalidated, just that experience of just being like a toddler with a phone and just being able to just scroll like this, that all by itself could keep somebody sort of stuck in this impulsive mind stage. So there's a lot of problems that come along with that. Obviously, if you get stuck here, you're going to have difficulty controlling your impulses, right? You're just going to go for things. You're going to definitely appear immature, right, to the people around you. And you're also going to have a hard time not being reactive later in life. Like it's going to be easy to set you off. You'll probably have a lot of triggers. And if a person has a lot of triggers, they probably have some work to do to mature. Like even if not all of them are stuck in this phase, there are probably parts that are stuck in this phase. Yeah. And so there might be some need to graduate those parts to the second order.
Assuming everything goes well though, and a person does evolve and move into growing into the next phase, where are we heading?
All right. So the second is, it's technically called the instrumental, but another way of saying it is the Imperial mind. So this is the second stage. And this develops later in childhood, or usually around adolescence. And it's focused on personal interests, on self-protection, and on concrete rules. So this is the time period where we enter more of a rule-based way of looking at the world. It doesn't necessarily mean other people's rules, though. It can actually be the rules that you follow. And so effectively the focus is on me getting my needs met and my desires met. So as opposed to impulsive, which is like, I want that, I'm just going to take it. There are more rules to things. Like you can't just like walk into a store and grab a candy bar and walk out. There are rules of paying for it. So how am I going to get the money to get that? Or how am I going to get what I want now that I understand that there are layers to society that prevent me from just grabbing it.
Gotcha. Right? So basically this level, the complexity of reality enters the frame. Because when you're a lower level, it's like, you're not really sure how things work. Your parents or your caretakers provide for you a lot. You're the things you do don't necessarily have direct consequences. You're not thinking about implications. But here you're starting to notice, oh, wait a minute. If I want to get a good grade on that test next week, I'm in high school.
Yep.
I have to study for that. Like mom and dad can't study for me. I have to go do that. To get my needs met of getting good grades or doing well, I have to go do something about that. I start to learn a little bit more about and the rules to get that need met. I've got to follow. And so the things we learned in the developmental part, the first stage, we're starting to now have to apply that. Like the emotional needs that I learned about when I was just testing. Well, now I'm tuned in. Okay, I know what my emotional needs are. Now I've got to set up a way to do that or get those met.
Yeah, I've learned impulse control because I got properly punished for being overly impulsive, right? Like I wanted something. I wanted a toy. I took it. I didn't realize that I was, stealing from a store. Or I took it. I didn't realize I was stealing from another little kid.
Yeah.
But now I understand that. Now I understand when you take something without having earned it or paid for it or whatever, then the world does not look at you fondly for that, and it will punish you. So now I can't be as impulsive, but I still want that thing. So how am I going to get it?
Yeah.
And so the Imperial is more about, it understands that power is important in all of this, right? Power, influence, negotiation, trying to get to that end game. Without being able to just, sort of quote unquote smash and grab. So this phase is really important because it's like pre-socialization, right? It's before your identity is wrapped up in other people, but after your identity is wrapped up in your emotions. So it's like that sort of middle phase. And the advantages are your personal agency starts to come in here. Right? Like you start to understand that you are separate from others and separate from your emotions and your desires. And you're capable of influencing your environment to get what you want. So you have a sense of agency. You have a sense of self-authority, moving through the world, influencing the world, negotiating with it, and trying to get what you, like the things that feed your needs outside of things that would cause you to get in trouble, right? Like there's a way to negotiate with reality and to create your own end game. Yeah. So the other advantage is goals come in here, right? People start to tap into this idea of earning and goals and getting to the other side through stages and phases and recognizing that like the hard work is a piece of this, or, like progress is a piece of this.
Not to over pattern, but I am going to, as we talk, I'm going to have a little side intuition running to see if I can make the connections around it, at least in my own mind. When we talk about the impulsive mind and the Imperial mind, I could say, well, if someone first learns about their personality type in the Myers-Briggs system or Enneagram, but let's say Myers-Briggs system, there's a little bit of this where at first you're like, oh, this is how I'm wired, and I'll play around with it. I'm not looking for the implications of it. I'm just trying to get a sense of how I'm wired. And then you start to learn the rules. Oh, okay, that's how my cognitive functions work. That's how I actually show up to the world. Oh, that's how I get in a loop. That's how things are. Like you start to make awareness around your life. I don't know. I'll see if I can pattern it all the way through all 5. I don't know. If you're watching or listening, see if you can do it too. But I'm trying to also apply this to other things we talk about often. And I wonder if we could apply it that way. But let's stick with the model. Let's go back. I won't over pattern too much.
All right, sounds good.
Let's keep getting the advantages and tune back into this.
Right. As mentioned, you begin to recognize consequences. And so this is also the early part of understanding sort of morality.
Yeah.
Right. Ethics and morality, and getting more tuned into moral reasoning, sort of understanding that piece. There's also the ability to act independently, right? The agency, but also the autonomy comes along with it, and not waiting for somebody to deliver something to you, but for you to work towards it on your own. And then there's also that foundation of trying to get your needs and desires met through your own work. It sets the stage for a later order's ability to do complex negotiation with others.
Yeah.
And so now it's not just negotiating with reality in life, but also interpersonal negotiation. So there's a lot of really important things that emerge during this phase.
So some of the things that could get somebody stuck here, though, in context that can do, would be overindulgence or overpunishment. So too much permissiveness in this arena, or too much lockdown, restriction can actually cause this to be delayed, the development here. Lack of accountability or responsibility as you're learning here. and also environments where rules are inconsistent or manipulatable. So if the rules aren't consistent, it's like, well, what's the point of following the rules if I can just cheat or manipulate them? Why should I try hard? And I think, like, actually, our daughter is 13 at the time of this recording. I'm thinking immediately that it's not even parental overindulgence or your caretakers. Sometimes just society isn't going to be helping with this, or technology.
Yeah.
Piper, our daughter, came to me and was like, hey, can I tie my little, I get her like a card for her allowance every week to go on. It's just a few dollars every week if she does her chores and all the things in the household. And she wanted to tie that to Temu so she could buy things on Temu. And Temu makes it very difficult to not have impulse, like to have impulse control, I should say.
Yeah.
Like Temu very much wants you to see shiny object and click the button and it's all your cards tied to it. So Piper was indulging that, and I'm like, we got to put a throttle on this. This is not helping her make good choices. And I said you always have to ask, but it's very impulsive. It's very like drawing her in on that. I'm like, we got to put some, maybe even take it away. Like, don't let her have that right now, because I feel like I can just see that slowing this whole process down, because she's still being able to activate that impulsiveness.
Yeah. Well, she's not learning saving.
Exactly.
Right? She's learning like,
well, I want that. I get it.
Consumerism, immediate gratification, and that's one of the reasons why overindulgence is a way people get stalled out here.
Yes,
because this phase is really about like seeing the world in a transactional way and what's in it for me. Right? When you get stuck at this phase, that's kind of how you are. You're that kind of person where you're like all relationships are transactional, and you're really trying to figure out like how do you get what you want. And when you have an overindulgent environment, then you get wired to believe that the environment is there to get you what you want, not that the environment is terrain that needs to be navigated so that you can earn what you need and what you want, your desires. So overindulgence just strips the person's ability to do the navigation because it just shows up magically. But also the withholding, right? Never being able to earn. Not being able to eventually get your desire, having everything just be way too locked down or over, like way too punishing, then you can't learn a healthy way of getting your needs and desires there either, because everything's always denied you. So you don't pick up the lessons on how to, like, I know I use the word earn many times, but I really think it's like one of the most powerful words I can think of. Like, how do we get to a place where we are earning the things that we have? And earning is a absolutely foundational fundamental principle for people to understand, and it happens oftentimes in this developmental level.
Well, I love it because it's used both in academia and business. You earn a degree, you earn a paycheck. These are things that you strive for.
Yeah.
Right. And you put work toward them with a goal in mind.
Yeah. And it's oftentimes the things that are unearned that we just get to have that make us feel so awful about it. In fact, there's a lot of compensatory behaviors that show up when people just get things without having earned them. They feel really weird about it. This is one of the big challenges to having generational wealth. Like if you're, a trust fund kid or whatever, and you just get to have money, oftentimes people feel really weird about that situation. They're not sure what their personal value is because they just never had to be uncomfortable. They just never had to go earn it themselves. And there's nothing wrong with I don't personally think there's anything wrong with generational wealth. I don't personally think there's anything wrong with your parents working hard, or maybe their parents working hard and you get the advantage to that. But the weirdness comes in by having an uncertainty around personal value without having earned something. And so regardless of, or like maybe if you're exceptionally beautiful, or maybe you're exceptionally intelligent or extremely talented, right? Just naturally talented in all these different ways. Like when you just get to have something, there's nothing, personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there is a weirdness that comes along with it when you get rewards that are not earned. And a lot of times people start to compensate, right? They start to feel weird about it. So this is the level that encourages us to understand the importance of feeling like one earned something. And if we can't get past that phase, then we get stuck in a, how do I get mine mentality. Yeah. But if we do successfully go through this phase, then we are qualified to go to order or stage number 3.
Now, what is that? Antonia, what are we talking about? Stage number 3.
All right. So this is one that most people reach as well. All right. Because this is like a basic developmental phase. Most people get into number 3, which is the socialized mind. So now it's not just what's in it for me. Now I'm starting to define myself by relationships outside of me and mine, right? Just my sort of centering on self. And usually this is reached in adolescence or early adulthood. I think of the hierarchical model of Timothy Leary's 8-circuit model.
Yeah.
This makes me think of going from time binding to stage 4, which is your sociosexual circuit. When that sociosexual circuit opens up, you start to try to figure out who you are and what your identity is in terms of the group. And that would be very similar to the socialized mind. So you internalize at this phase, you're internalizing societal expectations and aligning your values with groups. So there's been a lot of complaints around the concept of tribalism lately, right? Identity politics and identity being about tribalism. And I just think of that as being a bunch of people sort of stuck in socialized mind, right? Who am I in terms of who I'm aligned with?
It feels like the whole world is stuck here right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels that way. I'm not sure that's accurate, but that's the feeling I get.
Yeah.
Right? It feels like everywhere I turn, it's a tribe of somebody trying to, and not even like badly, like not even politically all the time. It's just like,
yeah.
I mean, even like clusters of tribes around products or companies, or I mean, it's just everywhere. This tribal view is on the rise. It feels like
brands, right?
Yeah.
I'm an Apple person. I'm an Android person. Those kinds of things. Absolutely. And so the socialized mind is where we are, where we sort of hand our identity over to, or we don't have to hand it over, but we are massively influenced by external authorities. So things like family, culture, religion, politics, peers, right? The people who are surrounding us. These are the people who are primarily helping us craft our understanding of ourselves and where we fit into that group. And so we tend to adopt our values here, right? And we're sort of buying them off the shelf, so to speak.
we're trying to align ourselves with this group, assimilate. We want to be like them. And so we're trying to adopt those values so we're part of them.
Yes.
Again, that's not a bad thing. That's a developmental stage.
Right. Exactly. Now, I mean, it can reach its shelf life, right?
Sure.
And anything that has overstayed its welcome can get a little rancified. And so the socialized mind, if we are unable to move beyond it, there can be major problems, right? We can get sort of stuck in paradigmatic thinking, paradigms that did not come from us, that we are not vetting, that we are sort of buying wholesale. And you can tell this way of thinking when somebody hears an opinion from someone and then makes a bunch of assumptions around opinions that usually go along with that first opinion, right, but aren't necessarily related to it. Does that make sense?
Like if I said right now, I just bought a Tesla yesterday.
Right.
All of a sudden that like means a bunch of political stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Or
right.
I burned my Tesla in my driveway. That like means something to people. Like
Yeah.
that's a thing.
Yeah.
Beyond just the product I'm talking about. It's like a whole identity and ideology and political tribe discourse around ostensibly an electric car.
Yep.
And it's like, that's what I'm seeing. At the time of this recording, that's what's happening right now in the world.
Yes. Yeah.
And that kind of seems crazy and silly to me. I understand why people are upset and all that, but that's like, whoa, so we have these markers that we go through that mean so much beyond what they actually mean.
Right. And what you're basically saying is you're not actually
I didn't really buy a Tesla yesterday, and I'm not even trying to take a side on anything right now because I know it's a hot button issue.
It's a hot button issue right now, and it's not necessarily that you're making commentary on the issue. We're actually more talking about, let's say somebody said, I bought a Tesla yesterday, and now a person assumes what their opinion on, say, abortion is.
Exactly.
Right. Or
like they know everything about their background, their political persuasions based on the fact they bought it. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And that's what we tend to do. It's a really dumb way to value people.
Well, it's a limited way, right?
Yeah.
It's an understandable if one is stuck in the socialized mind, but it's a very limited way.
Thank you for the reminder. It's not a dumb way. It's
Yeah.
a limited way, I tell you.
Well,
more empowering language. Thank you.
I'll just say this. There are advantages to the socialized mind.
Sure.
And one needs to go through this developmental phase, this order, and collect all the lessons that they can in order to graduate to the next one. Because the next one actually... before we get to the next one, I'll just say a lot of people stop here.
in the socialized mind.
Yes.
And we're stuck here.
That's right. A lot of people get stuck right here and they live and die in the socialized mind. And so it's good to know why there's great lessons available at this level, but also that, like pick up these lessons because there's more to come, right?
Yeah.
So the advantages, the big ones is, obviously a sense of belonging, right? You have a community, you've got people who are like-minded that share your values, hopefully share your interests. And so you get this idea of support and camaraderie and cooperation, and people have your back, or at least ostensibly they do, right? And so that's the number one thing that comes from it, is that you have a support system.
Yeah.
There's also guidance here available, right? You look at people who are further along on the same path that share your values, and they can provide guidance in front of you. They can provide mentorship. You can get a sense of structure oftentimes, right? Not always, it depends on the tribe you choose, but a lot of tribes have a sense of order and organizational structure around them. And so you can borrow from that, right? And there's, we need structure and order in our life. And so if an organization, maybe say a religious structure, is helping provide that, there's a lot of benefits to that.
Well, and there's vertical models inside of there, because there's like a progression. You can achieve things inside of these structures, these groups. There's like hierarchies to it. So you can kind of feel accomplished. You can move through that. It's very helpful, I think, for us as humans to give us a pathway.
Yep, absolutely. There's also, for some people, this is the beginning of their true moral development. In earlier iterations in, say, the Imperial mind, you recognize that there's laws and rules and you've got to navigate through them, but that doesn't mean you've internalized them. It just means that that you can't just go take whatever you want to, that you're going to have to figure out a way to get there that doesn't offend the rule structures around you. But for a lot of people, it's the socialized mind that's the first time that they start internalizing some of those rules and values, they make it their own. And so the socialized mind time period is very important for a lot of people, for developing a sense of morality and ethics, that we're doing it not just because we are not, I'm not following rules because otherwise I'll have consequences. I'm following rules because I recognize how they are helping my community and they're helping people outside of me. And so, it's an important step for, being a good person.
Well, and I start to basically say, I'm not the only person that matters. Right? Other people matter beyond just me. And this group helps me see identity beyond just myself. I think that's really what I get from the social frame is I'm like, yeah, I'm not the all encompassing, the world doesn't revolve around me, Joel.
Right.
There's other people too to factor in. I think this is very much learned at this level.
Yeah. Compassion, empathy, support, anything that has to do with sort of interpersonal awareness, all gets developed at this time period. And I think there's also an important cultural and historical continuity that is found here, meaning that different tribes have tapped into different kinds of wisdom. They understand things that are important and have been passed down. It's our cultures that pass down important lessons, from generation to generation, core principles that don't change no matter what the context is.
Yeah.
And so having a socialized mind is how we get the benefit of that cold wisdom that gets passed down from generation to generation, but also just cultural texture, the beauty of a certain culture or the beauty of a way of doing things that gets preserved through rituals and through gatherings and all the other things that go along with socialization.
Food. That could be seen as a gift all these social groups give us. A people group creates food, cultural food, that we all get to benefit from. Right? I think that's a very easy one to tune into that's not political or divisive. It's something I think we all appreciate, no matter what the culture. But there are ways people can get stuck here, right? So let's talk about, again, if you're gripped in the socialized mind, you might have fear of rejection or abandonment by the social groups. You haven't gotten over the fear that I'm going to get kicked out. If I do something that this group doesn't like, I'm in big trouble. Can I make it on my own? I don't know. I'm dependent on this group and their approval. Being raised in a highly conformist or authoritarian system where questioning is punished, it's like your mind is like, it is too dangerous to not be part of this group. I have to be part of a group. And sometimes people even were raised in that really strong structure. They get themselves out and then they find themselves in another one very similar in a very different way.
Yeah.
It was a lateral move. They didn't actually transcend it because they're so used to having that strict punishment for disobeying the group.
I see that so often.
They just didn't have the right group before, right?
Yeah,
but the mechanisms are all still there.
Yes.
Especially people that grew up in like cults and things. I think that's definitely there. And then external validation becomes a necessity, not a preference. In other words, I'm like dependent on this external. Am I okay? I'm looking to everybody else to set the tone of something in my own life.
Yep.
Which again, these can be good, but if you get stuck in that, any of these, you're going to get hijacked here. You're just going to churn.
Yeah. If you don't think you can live without external approval, right? And that's an understandable fear. I mean, we've done podcast episodes before on why it makes sense that we fear social censure.
Yeah.
Like there's something to be said for, I mean, we like our Paleolithic minds don't know that if we get kicked out of the tribe that we're not going to like die on the Serengeti all by ourselves. Like before, socialization has been necessary to survive, for pure survival. And so this idea that we might be kicked out of the tribe, so to speak, or our group of people that we have seen as our support system suddenly turn on us, we don't know if we're going to be okay. And that makes sense. It makes sense why we get stuck here, because we see everybody else is having our back and we feel like we have safety in numbers. And if we go our own way, or if we question whatever is the doctrine or the protocol or whatever, can we make it on our own? And sometimes we have examples of people who don't, right? Like they're too iconoclastic. They're too outside of the system. And the world is not always nice to them. And we go, yeah, I don't want to be that guy.
The guy from Into the Wild, I think, pretty much rejected social groups, and he ended up dying. Spoiler alert, sorry.
Yeah.
It's been out for a long time. The movie and the book have been out for decades, so
Yeah.
I figured that's not too much of a spoiler. But basically, he's like, I'm rejecting this social frame. I'm going to go out on my own, and to the point where he wouldn't even use things that the social group made, like maps. If he had a map on him, he wouldn't have died in the Alaskan wilderness.
Yeah.
But he eschewed them because that was made by this group that I'm trying to, groups of people that I'm trying to get away from. So I think we're dependent on other humans.
Yeah.
It's kind of, that's a ridiculous, taking it so extreme, and he ended up not making it.
Yeah, exactly.
So where do we go if we develop? So we're in this social, where is the available developmental stage next for us?
Right.
If we're here in this social frame.
Right. Well, if we, just as a note, if we get stuck, that means that what's happening is we have difficulty questioning norms.
Yeah.
That we have difficulty making independent decisions, and we do not handle conflict very well. People get stuck in the socialized mind because they don't deal with conflict well. And if we have a hard time with conflict, like we just kind of go along, get along to go along, or go along to get along, or whatever, then we can get stuck in the socialized mind. And that includes people who are very independent thinkers, right? So once we get to the law of diminishing returns on the socialized mind, though, there's an availability for the next level that, again, not everybody chooses. I would say the majority of people get stuck in the socialized mind.
And by the way, if we're following along my little side patterning thing, which I'm not absolutely certain of at all, I'm just kind of playing with the idea. This would make sense that when we learn personality types, we kind of play with the ideas, then we learn the rules, and then we start to see, okay, me versus other people. In fact, a lot of people join our personality profile or training program, I think, when they're in the socialized mind stage, or at least they're thinking about that in personality type terms, because they want to know, how do I read other people's personality types? How do I help them arrive at a best fit type? How do I help them understand more about themselves? And what is my relationship to them? Can I co-create an experience? I think a lot of that happens in our profile training at that stage. And like those kinds of like typing people, profiling people, all of that. So I'm seeing if you're following along, watching or listening, you let me know. Are we onto something? Am I onto some patterns? I want to know if you're following the same patterns. Let's go to 4 though.
Yeah.
So this is called
the self-authoring mind.
Okay.
All right, so this is the 4th order. And this usually emerges in mid-adulthood, if at all. All right. So again, a lot of people get stuck in the socialized mind, but this is if you've gone through the socialized mind and you sort of hit the law of diminishing returns. I mean, I think what's happened to many people in certain generations, I would say particularly Gen Xers and down, is, and I think for Gen Xers, Gen Xers being people born between like 61 and 81, according to generational theory, which is its own thing, but that's the generational concept or system that I ascribe to.
By the way, you should go, if you're listening or watching, you haven't heard the podcasts on the generational theory. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah.
The Personality Hacker, the whole theory is awesome. Go listen to those. They're great. Yeah,
they're my favorite. And, or that particularly the book, Fourth Turning is here. Those are fabulous books as well. So, there's a whole sort of generational thing that happened, and I think it's because we were the generation that were young when the world went from modernism to postmodernism. And
like when we were in high school, basically.
yeah, high school or 20 somethings when things went like fully postmodern. And so we were raised when we were young, right? When we were like sort of learning how the world works, we were raised with modernism, which is like, there's right, there's wrong, there's a single opinion, like there's a line in the sand, and here are values that we're going to give you, and you can't question them. And then the world went postmodern, and it was like, oh yeah, actually that whole thing about like one perspective, there's like a gajillion of them, and we're going to give them all to you at the same time. So,
and there's no hierarchy to it.
And there's no hierarchy, and there's no better or
order,
worse.
or
right.
It's just chaos. Here you go.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we're all going to be very self-referential while we do it and break the fourth wall. So there's a whole generation of Gen Xers like, whoa, okay, well, I guess that means that I have to start questioning things, or maybe I even get permission to question things for the first time. Now, younger generations like millennials, or what I guess everybody's going to call Gen Z at this point.
Yeah.
I think they think that they were the first people to start questioning stuff, but actually they were the beneficiaries of being quite young when postmodernism happened. And when I say beneficiaries, there's also like some negative things that came along with it as well.
Yeah.
But Xers, I think in droves, were a generation of people who are really kind of questioning the assumptions and the premises that they were raised with. I think I've heard the phrase deconstructing my religion about 4 billion times from people my age, or in my age, my generation. And I think that this is an attempt to graduate from socialized mind up to self-authoring mind.
Yeah.
So self-authoring mind is effectively starting to create your own system of meaning. Now, there's a lot of people, I suspect, that believe they have done this, but I only think that a person can really truly claim this if it's almost impossible to put oneself in any specific category. Like, if you can definitively claim a category, I am definitively this religion, or I am definitively this political persuasion, you're probably still in socialized mind, right? If you're taking things like this issue is tied to this issue, which is tied to this issue, and I, like everybody in my political, side, all feel the same way on these issues, or with very small variants.
What about identity? Like, I'm an American, or I'm a Canadian, or would that also be at the socialized mind, or do you think that could still have your own?
Well, if you believe that being an American means it automatically comes with very specific value sets.
Okay, so that means all these values that automatically mean that, and they mean that the same for everybody.
That's right.
That means that we're not here yet. If
a single word is all you need to communicate to another person in order for them to understand all of your sort of opinions and values, you're in a socialized mindset.
Gotcha.
Right? The self-authoring mindset tends to pick and choose. Right. It tends to go like, I like this from over here. I like this from over here. This is a thing I've never heard anybody else say, but this is something I think. And so I guess I'm the only one that really thinks it, but I'm okay with that. Right. Like it's a,
what are the algorithms supposed to do with this though?
Yeah, exactly.
Like a YouTube channel that's like self-authoring. It doesn't like pick a niche and an algorithm to like play to.
Yeah.
Or our world doesn't support this very often.
No, it doesn't really
like
like
this,
it.
You're cut out of all economics, all possibility. Not all.
Yeah.
I'm being hyperbolic.
Right.
Excuse me. It can be more challenging if you start to self-author. In fact, you're going to have maybe worse results if you go here. I can see why a lot of people probably aren't going to go to this level.
Yes. And like you mentioned before, there are people who have left one socialized mindset and then they make a lateral move and then they adopt a different socialized mindset. Yeah. And they feel like they've gone self-authoring. They feel like because they left the one that they were used to or were raised with or learned in college or whatever, because they swapped to a different one, then now they're self-authoring. But if you're just buying another one wholesale, you're still in the socialized mindset, which again, there's advantages to that, right? Like there's good things about all of that. It's just not self-authoring, right? You're just not at a place where effectively it's like, and when people go, I can't be labeled, that's closer, right? The self-authoring mindset really truly can't be labeled except for there's a label of one. It's you. And you have a totally unique set of values, principles, opinions, beliefs from every other person because you made them up, right? You created them all on your own. It's like I have a religion of one, or I have a political persuasion of one. I remember the first time I saw the movie Inside Out, there's a character in the first one named Bing Bong who is like deep in the main character's subconscious. It was a childhood imaginary friend. And this imaginary friend had all these different sort of animal parts that made up the imaginary friend. It was like the body of a dolphin and the ears of an elephant and like, you know, like all these different mismatched animal parts. And I think she invented it when she was like a toddler, right? Because that's why it was so deep in the unconscious. But I remember the first time I watched that movie, I thought, if I was ever going to pick a political mascot, I would choose Bing Bong. Because Bing Bong was not one thing. Bing Bong was a mismatch and hodgepodge of about 15 different animals or animal parts.
Yeah.
And I thought that feels like how everybody's politics should be, right? It feels like everybody should be Bing Bong. Now, that's not necessarily true. There's probably advantages to most people having a socialized mindset, actually. But if a person is going to go to the self-authoring, that's kind of how they're going to have to look at life, right? Yeah. You can't just take something wholesale off of the shelf. You can't just go, well, this is my opinion on free speech, so I guess this is my political alignment, and this political alignment says this about all these issues.
Other topics.
So I guess that's how I feel about those other topics as well. You have to take absolutely every single topic separately, and sometimes you're going to align with this group, and sometimes you're going to align with this group, and sometimes, you know, and you're going to have
exhausting.
It is.
Sounds exhausting for most people.
Which is why most people don't do it.
Yeah.
Is because it requires a lot of thought labor, a lot of mental work in order to get to self-authoring. But there are advantages.
Let's talk about those.
Okay. So the advantages are an autonomous identity. Okay. So meaning that you are defining your own values and ideals and your own principles and your own opinions, and you're doing it without external authority. So if you see corruption in tribes and groups, you don't have to necessarily align yourself with that, right? You get to, you have to be careful of the corruption you're going to weave into your own version of reality, right? So you have to be also self-monitoring. But you don't have to necessarily grab something from somebody else. Like, you get your own independent identity in all of this. And so you're getting closer to individuating away from others and individuating more with self. You also end up with an internal moral compass, which has to, again, be frequently calibrated, but your ethics are chosen, right? And you integrate them from personal frameworks and experience. And therefore, in some ways, they're better vetted, right? Like, you're not just going, this is how the world works, and you're using theory. Like, this is not an academic way of looking at reality. You can't just theoretically do so. And you can't just do it based on, like, what somebody in academia told you or somebody from a pulpit told you. You have to think through it and generally experience it yourself in order to come to a conclusion about what is right and wrong. Mm. And so it's better vetted information. Right? It's like, it's more true. It's more honest. It's more real. And so that's a major advantage. You also have the capacity for leadership, more authentic leadership. So you've already gone through a fair bit of self-direction. You've already gone through a bit of like pulling away from other authority figures and making yourself more in an authority frame. And so because you are self-leading, it gives you an ability to understand what leadership looks like in a more honest way, right? Not just parroting, not just fulfilling the agenda of some other organization. You're doing it in a more sovereign way. So you gain a sense of like sort of sovereign leadership.
Yeah, it probably also allows some contrarian thinking. You know, I'm sure, was it Copernicus who came up with the idea that the sun does not revolve around the earth? I can't remember, but basically it was the Middle Ages. Yeah. And the name's escaping me. I think I got it right, but but it's like,
I think you're right.
If you're thinking like the Catholic Church, you're not going to come up with the idea like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I don't think this is how the planets work. Like, I'm not even going to ask the question because this isn't how the planets work. This isn't how the sun and the stars and all this operates in space. But have you self-authoring, you're going to be like, wait a minute, I'm observing something that's not canon to all this social group that's telling me this. Mm-hmm. I see something differently. And often these people are murdered and killed and like crucified that are independent thinkers. And I think we can even see that today in some ways.
A bit now, but less so. You know?
Less than it was like back then.
Right.
We got bad there for a while.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit how somebody gets stuck here.
Well, there's two more things that I want to mention as advantages.
Jump those in.
The last two that I would say is you have a higher resilience against external pressure. And so this idea of self-leadership, the idea that you're not just handing your, not just identities, but sort of framework over to a collective.
Yeah.
Well, in order to do that, just the process itself means that you're going to get a lot of external pressure, right? People don't like it when you break away from them. They don't like it when you break away from a political persuasion or a religious persuasion, because you're kind of invalidating them. You're saying like, yeah, I don't know if this societal mind thing is the end all be all. And if they're still in societal mind, they will not be happy. And so just the act itself of going to a self-authoring mind means that you're going to have to get more resilient to external pressure. So by the time you get to the other side of it, you're a lot less easy to take in, right? It's harder to persuade you of things that are, kind of specious or dubious.
Yeah.
And so you have more of a sense of self. You're less susceptible to external pressure.
You get more hostile comments on YouTube.
You do, yeah, but that's okay. And then also a major advantage comes in the form of capacity for long-term vision, because you're handing yourself over less to other people's visions. You have to self-generate your own vision, right? Like, it's not just like, okay, I'm aligning myself with these people that are going this direction. It's like, well, why am I doing this? What am I thinking about? Why is this important to me? Where does this all go, right? What's the conclusion of all of this if I play it out? You have to be thinking in terms of the future. And so because of that, you end up creating a lot more self-generating goals. And those self-generating goals allow for more complex thinking about future plans and future orientations. So that's one major advantage that comes along with it.
But if we lack exposure to diverse perspectives or critical thinking, we can get stuck here. We could also get stuck here if we have too much external pressure, like jobs, financial concerns, social pressure, these external things. And then internalized self-doubt can also be very difficult. In this, so we can find ourselves churning here and not developing if some of those factors are in play.
Right. We might know that we need to get away from more societal thinking, but if we don't have a sense of, like, if we don't trust ourselves, right? Like, we might just kind of go like, well, I don't know where I land.
Yeah.
Like, I know that I'm not aligned with everybody else, but I'm not 100% sure of what mine are. And I mean, that thing of the external pressure, it's like life just gets busy. So you said that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And so you might leave. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons why people tend to make lateral moves in societal mind. They like leave one sort of off the shelf thought process or paradigm or way of looking at things and then move to the next one, because they just don't have the time or space to be able to to come up with their own bespoke way of looking at reality.
So if we're following along that little patterning thing for personality types that I'm kind of following along with,
that you're inventing as we go.
I'm inventing as we go. It may not matter.
Who knows?
Well, the self-authoring, I'm really seeing a lot of people that maybe they've known personality types. They've even tried to do some personal growth work. Maybe they've even taken our personality profile training course, or they've learned some method for reading other people at the social mind level because they want to understand people more. At the self-authoring level, we get a lot of these folks in our Personality Life Path mentorship program. People who are going, oh, wait, I just bought wholesale what my church told me all my life. Maybe I should think a little bit more about this for myself and not just buy everything that I grew up with. Or, oh, wait, that political persuasion, maybe I should review that. Or I've been in this career for 20 or 30 years, and how did I even find myself here? Now that I know a little bit more about my personality type and I've talked to other people at the social mind level, now I'm starting to think of like my self level. Maybe I should be the author of the next phase. And I think what happens at the social mind level when we're in personality type there is we start to see the building blocks of self that aren't tied to the group. Even though we start maybe reading other people, we go, wait a minute, the ingredients of this other person are cognitive functions that aren't they're not really identity. They're more of like a map to the identity. And that starts to happen, I think, the social mind side in personality types. At least that happened, I think, for a lot of our students and us. And then you go into the self and you're like, now that I've got these unconnected building, they're not connected to any ideology. They're just the way the mind works. 4 ways to perceive the world, 4 ways to judge the world. Now that I have that, actually, I could use that as a basis to self-author. I could use that as the ingredient base to start to make my own decisions of how I'm going to live. Now I know, for example, me, I have ENFP preferences. Authenticity is my co-pilot. It's the way, how I'm going to navigate my world the best if I grow and develop that. And that's independent of any political, social, religious framework. Those are just the cognition of my mind. It gives me a ballast for self-identity, self-definition, and it actually gives me that authorship platform, I think, for this stage.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what, like in a personal life path, we spend a lot of time teaching that. Here's the 8 things that are going to be basically run your life. Tune into these. What's your relationship to them? How do they impact you? And now you're not tethered to some ideology. You're tethered to yourself in a way of self-understanding. You can author any life you want within the bounds of reality.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so powerful about type at this stage here, personally.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a way of, it's almost like a scaffolding to hang concepts and ideas on that is agnostic.
Yep.
Right? There's like an agnosticism to it. And I don't mean necessarily agnosticism in terms of God. I mean agnosticism in terms of like paradigms. Like it's like, well, it doesn't really have an agenda. It doesn't really care which thing you believe, just as long as you're being true to yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably why it ends up encouraging people to emerge away from societal mind and into self-authoring mind, because it gives them sort of a place to land, a ballast.
But I've noticed a pushback sometimes, because when you do tune into the way we teach personality type, when you get down to that cognitive level and you see it as agnostic, like you say, you could be an ENFP Buddhist, you could be an ENFP evangelical Christian from Alabama, you could be, ENFP president or prime minister of a country. Like, it doesn't matter what you're attuned to, what you're doing, like your mental wiring is there. That's what it's speaking to. And people go, oh, that feels like it removes the power of the social group. If I find the source code, that feels like, it almost feels wrong to do that, I think, for people. They almost feel like hostile to it. Like they don't like the fact that you're breaking it down into these components that could be applied to any ideology. It's like it's suspect because it looks like it could be applied to any ideology. So that means it's not just applied to my ideology. So it's got to be bad and wrong.
It's not just serving my agenda.
I mean,
it's serving anybody's agenda.
If I'm a Christian, it works in my Christian frame, but you can also work for Buddhists. Well, can't be true, because it can work for them too. It starts to get suspect, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Well, and people always want to bring things to their sandbox, and that's, I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why we try really hard to like not really talk about what our personal opinions are on things.
It's because the social group will push back on it. We don't want to add anything else. This is enough to be divisive when you're talking to the social mind.
Yes.
This self-authoring mind using type in the way we use it is already enough to trigger people.
You got it.
And make them not want to follow us here.
That's right.
Because it's more principle-based, not topical-based.
And if you want to encourage people to go from societal mind to self-authoring mind, you can't be deliberately offensive of their societal mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. You got to kind of be gentle. You got to go, I totally understand how somebody would think that. There's other things to think as well.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. You have to be sympathetic. Yeah.
All right.
All right. So,
any last comments before we move into the fifth one?
Just that getting stuck here usually feels like you don't fit in societal mind anymore, but you haven't fully given yourself permission or time or space to move into this self-authoring paradigm. But it is, and to create a distinction between this and the next phase, it is creating, it's like a religion of one, right? Or a political ideology of one, right? The self-authoring mind is not getting away from an organized or structured way of experiencing reality. It's just getting away from everybody else's being sort of forced upon you.
And I would say, and this is going to be important because I know where we're heading next, it is congruent and non-contradictory. Meaning I can't, at the level of self-authoring, you're not going to hold two paradigms or two frameworks that are in opposition to each other. You would choose one to dominate over the other. I'm going to choose this one and not this one. I'm authoring my life in this way, not this way. Yeah. So it is decisive. It is judicious.
Yeah, it's either good.
Makes a choice.
Yeah, it's either good to be somebody who, understands the value of hard work and money, right? Or it's not, or you reject the capitalist society and go do your own thing.
But it's your choice for you.
It's your choice. You're authoring it, but there's still right, wrong, either ors.
Yeah. But when we get to the next level, this starts to change a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about step 5 or stage 5.
So stage
order
5 is called the self-transforming mind. And this is a space of fluidity. It generally comes in later adulthood, if at all. So the assumption is you've already gone through the self-authoring time period, and that's already itself a difficult place to get through. But if you manage to get to the other side of self-authoring, which means you've done that work, you've figured out your little paradigm of one, and you've collected all the lessons, and even that feels too confining, then the next piece is one that is way more fluid and open to complexity. So a word that I think is good for this level or this phase or order is paradox.
Yeah.
It's getting to a place where you start to see that the truth is paradoxical. And by truth, I just mean like reality. It's not a cohesive, non-contradictory way of looking at things. It's almost like defined by contradiction. It's defined by the fact that things are so complicated and complex, you can't be rigorously continuous.
I would introduce the word here, irreconcilable reality. Mm-hmm. Meaning I think at the self-authoring phase, we still feel like we can reconcile and like solve the equation and figure out this paradox. Like we'll eventually, I just don't have the information, but there's going to be a reconciliation at some point between these paradoxes.
Yeah.
Paradox. Yeah. But at this level, it's basically owning and saying, oh wait, resolution's never coming. Like I'm never going to be able to resolve this paradox.
Yeah.
In fact, I just have to buy that it is a paradox, and that's just maybe a multifaceted paradox.
Yep.
And I can't reconcile it. There's no way to resolve it. There's no fixing it. There's no like final answer. It actually is the tension between the two polarities. That's the thing I'm adopting to see it.
Yeah. I would almost even say the word embrace.
Yes.
It embraces contradictions and it embraces the unreconcilable nature of reality. It kind of goes like, if people ask you what you think, I mean, I almost think of Chidi, Antonia in the show
The Good Place.
The Good Place.
Yeah.
Where like his thesis was like 3,000 pages or something, because he'd go on about like one perspective of reality, and then apparently it was like, but on the other hand, and then he'd go through a totally contradictory perspective of reality, and one could argue that this is the place of philosophy, right? Philosophers stay in this place. Now, not all philosophers. A lot of philosophers are in the self-authoring mindset, where they put forth a very specific way of looking at reality that has been self-generated, self-authored, but there's still rules in there, and there's still like this is the right way of looking at things. When a person gets to a place where they are actually holding multiple perspectives at the same time, and no single self-authored paradigm is enough, right? You have to have like multiple self-authored paradigms in order to understand the complexities of reality. Now you're getting into the self-transforming mind.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very rare to run into somebody who's managed to get here, right? It's not an easy place to be. And it requires, I think, and this is where I think it really dovetails in with, say, Jungian psychology, or at least from my perspective. I think the path to what Carl Jung called individuation, I think a key is making peace with a feeling of uncertainty. I don't think we can get there without contending with and sitting with uncertainty. Not unknown. Unknown is a little different. But specifically uncertainty, which is a feeling all of us are seeking. We seek certainty. That's why we have worldviews to begin with. The major advantage to any worldview is that it gives us a sense of certainty, that we know that we're doing the right thing. We know that this is the right choice to make. We feel certain about it. We know this is the thing we should be doing.
Wow.
I think when somebody gets to a self-transforming mindset, one of the things that they've made peace with is that we can never be certain. Right? Like we make decisions despite a feeling of uncertainty. And
here's my little patterning thing running on the side again to say how type influences this. Mm-hmm. When we understand our cognitive function stack, we call it a CAR model, personalityhacker.com/CAR model. If you want to learn more, it's just a way to see the mind and the cognition. In that CAR model, we talk about a descending order of certainty, and this is for the self-understanding type. And our recommendation is making peace with that uncertainty about parts of ourselves that we, even if we have skill or competence built there, we'll never feel certain around. We'll just always feel uncertain, right? We use the example of maybe an EFJ who has like 3 doctorate diplomas and still feels like, do I have all the information I need to have?
Right.
Even though I'm a trained person in this, I've got competence, I'm very smart, I know my subject in and out. There's a little voice in the head like, maybe you just don't know enough. Maybe you just don't have enough. Maybe you get one more degree, you'll know enough. Like as an example.
Or you'll be allowed to have your own opinions on the subject that go against everybody else's.
But you just got to know more first or something. But it's not a sense of competence or proficiency. It's just that little uncertainty. So if type gives us a a way to practice that when we get to this stage, this paradox thinking, where it's like, well, I mean, it's not really, I can't really say one or the other. It's kind of both at the same time. There's a paradox to it. It's contextual depending on the situation I'm in. I think personality type gives us a map to here. It starts giving us some practice lines where we can practice this. I think I've dipped into this often, being able to hold a paradox. And I think it's because of my attunement to the functions and to type. I've had to make peace with my own uncertainties.
Yeah.
And that helps here. Okay, let's talk about some of the advantages. Why it sounds like this is a freaking nightmare to be here. First of all, you already had to go through the stage before, which no one wants to go through. It's hard work. Everybody's going to like ostracize you. The algorithms YouTube won't play nice with you if you don't stay on topic and message.
That's right. Stay on topic.
Right? You're going away from the social group. So what on earth could the advantage of being here be?
Yeah. All right. So fair question. Why would one want to do this kind of work? Well, the first one is obviously an openness to complexity, right? And life is complex. When we are overly reductionistic, sometimes we're shocked at the results when we make a decision based on reducing things too simply and we did not get the result that we were hoping for because we did not take in the full complexity of the situation. We were just, we forced ourselves to think in either or ways, black and white, right or wrong, right? And this space, this mindset allows us to take in a bigger system, a bigger perspective, where we can see more nuance in situations. We can understand that things are not like just because it was right in one situation doesn't mean it's right in all situations. Now, there's a way of seeing that still fits into the mold of certain societal worldviews. You know, there's any good societal worldview is going to allow for some wiggle room, a little bit of individual discretion. Otherwise, it wouldn't have lasted as long as it has. But we're not really talking about an ability to to make personal preferential decisions, but still align to something that's, you know, like that there are values that were created outside of yourself. We're talking about sort of understanding maybe even the concept that values might not exist at all, right? Just as a baseline, like values both exist and don't exist. The universe is both friendly and harsh. There's things that are truth with a capital T, but then aren't always true. There is a like sort of a fundamental premise level place where it might, you know, like we just simply don't know. We just don't. And to pretend that we do is, you know, it's kind of an overreach.
Well, and then I'm already also seeing a pattern that if we haven't gone through the level before, which is this self-authoring, like that gives us the mechanism to then, because no one's going to necessarily meet us on some of these we're going to be very alone. You think self-authoring is lonely.
Yeah.
You get here, you're going to have very specific contextual thinking that most people will not agree with you on, I would assume.
Yeah, well, and might not even be able to follow your train of thought.
Yes.
And in fact, might find you incredibly boring every time they ask your opinion on something.
You might have to do a lot of self-validating because it's going to be hard to show the math because you're thinking more complexly, I think, than most.
Yes. Yeah, and just it's rare when somebody has the bandwidth to be able to follow you to wherever, you know, you went in order to think about it this way. And by bandwidth, I don't actually mean I don't necessarily mean the intelligence for it. I just mean like the wherewithal, like the life force to pour into it. Like if you talk to somebody who's been at the Transforming Mind for a while and ask their opinion on things, it might even sound like gobbledygook. You know, it's like it'll feel very contradictory. It'll feel like they're hedging a lot. You know, it's like that old phrase, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. That's a very societal mindset worldview. Yeah, like to me, I'm like, well, why would if you stand for something, that means you already fell for something. Do you know what I mean? It's like you already fell for it. You just picked one. You just went, there's many things to fall for, so I guess I'll fall for this one first, you know, or like I'll just let this one be the thing that got me. I find that to be a very funny phrase because it's like, well, you the reality doesn't really care what our opinions are.
What is the social mind saying? I'd rather know where you stand. I don't care what it is, as long as you define it.
Yes.
So I know where I stand in relation to you. That's really what the person's saying.
That's right. And that's why it's a societal mindset, right? Because we're trying to identify ourselves based on each other, like as a reflection of each other, right? Yeah. We understand our differences based on the fact that we're not you. I'm not in your worldview and you're not my worldview. And now we know who we are. But if you're talking to somebody and you cannot tell if they're in your worldview or not, sometimes it sounds like they are and sometimes it sounds like they're not. And so it's like, just quit wiggling, just stand still for a second and just tell me how you think. And it's like, well, I kind of think a lot of things and I could totally see your perspective on that. And I don't think this is just perspective sympathy where it's like, oh, I could see how somebody could think that. I think when you get to self-transforming mindset, I think you get to a place where you're like, no, you could totally be right.
Like you're steel manning that and you're really thinking about it and you're taking it going, yeah, that could possibly be a really a good way to see the world. And I also see this over here too. It's a lot of and thinking.
It's and
not
thinking.
or thinking. Yeah. It's this and this.
And people are like,
synthesis.
How could those two things be true at the same time? They're in direct contradiction. It's like, yep, that's the paradox of it. Yeah. And so so the ability to hang with the complexity is a major advantage. You're naming disadvantages that like people don't like it very much, but at least you can think in a higher order, like a more complex, higher order thinking.
And I think there's one in the world right now. As an example of this, there's a paradox here. Is individualism the best way for us all to live, or is collectivism the best way for all of us to live?
Yeah,
I'd say it's both.
Yeah, it's like yes.
How can you have both? That doesn't make sense. But I would agree. I think it's both. We have to find a harmony and to it all in a way.
Yep.
It can't be one or the other, or life's going to be really bad for all of us.
Yep.
That's a dumb paradox to pick, but that's an illustration of a paradox that I think.
Yeah.
I think both are true, honestly.
At the same time in equal measures.
Yes. And so it's the balance that's tough. Yeah. Okay. What are the advantages here? Because I know we're getting long here on the show.
I know. So systems thinking.
Okay.
All right. So systemic thinking comes in here, and I just call it systems thinking because that's to me like one of the best models to use to get into self-transforming mind. But instead of thinking in cause effect, you're basically seeing everything as like nodes of a system. And because of that, you start to see how things are influencing each other. Like whole paradigms are influencing other whole paradigms. And one would think that they were totally separate, but it's like, no, actually they have relationships with each other. Like I've started to get to a place where I realize that entire religions have relationships with entire religions, and they're in reaction to each other. They're in reaction and response. So it feels like they're self-generating and self-authoring, but actually in some weird way, paradigms themselves are in societal, mindset with each other.
Yeah.
And so you start to see all of these influences and going like, that's fascinating. So you get kind of a meta perspective on how all of this is working. Another advantage is that it's much easier to get to ego transcendence, right? In this way, because you're kind of like, I think it's hard to get to self-transforming mind until you do a fair amount of shadow work, which is allowing other people to reflect back to you the things you can't see about yourself. And when a person does that, they get a little less locked into their ego. And this is the path that helps get to whole self a little bit easier, right? And because whole self has a self-transforming mindset, right? So if you can get to the authentic, honest whole self, this is where it lives, right? Yeah. It's understanding the paradoxes of you. And so you get a more direct line to that part of yourself. You also end up being sort of wise. Like people they might not want your opinions on reality, but they definitely want your insights, because this is a place that frequently people don't get to unless they have a fair amount of insight. There's also a lot of learning. Like you're not in a fixed mindset, you're in a growth mindset generally. And so you're growing and you're seeing things and you're taking in a bigger picture all the time. And so you end up being a person who's got like a fair amount of ever-growing knowledge base when you're in this space.
Ways to get arrested in your development, though, here is over-attachment to your identity, particularly the self-defined authored identity before in the earlier stage.
Yeah.
And that's going to be tough. I think the part of this, too, is your identity is not as rigid. You have a much more fluid, adaptable identity that can move and flex and flow. A lot of people would see that as incongruity, fickleness, like having that fluid identity. So there's an instinct to run back to what we know and be congruent. If I said this yesterday, I'm going to be this way today, and we get rewarded for that. So we tend to not want to have a fluid identity. We like to have our identity pretty strong. Mm-hmm. So that can be a difficulty there. Also, fear of questioning one's self-authored system. So in a way, you're going against your own self. You just figured out all the things you stand for. It's like, well, maybe actually there's more paradox here. Maybe it isn't just one side the way I've authored it before. So like you have to almost question deconstruct your own assumptions in a way, which is the challenge inwardly for yourself. And you're the only person that can do that work. And then high stress environments that demand rigid consistency or control. This can be hard to be fluid in. If I was a school teacher and I show up as a different identity every day and have a different kind of framework, like today I'm into Montessori education and tomorrow I'm going to do Common Core, and then I pick something else the third day, it's going to be a whiplash for people maybe I'm leading or the structure that I'm in. So we have to find places for this to come out, and probably the context matters.
Yeah.
So there might be some resource or opportunity here, maybe later in life when you don't have so much pressure on you to perform with a strong identity and consistency.
Right.
This can emerge more.
Yeah, I think it's hard to raise children from a self-transforming mind because they're not ready for that yet. They need to go through a far more rigid, structured ways of thinking before they're even sort of able to hit this. And I think, like any good vertical model, you can't skip steps. So if you try to get to this place before you're ready, it actually just ends up being a sort of a bastardization of one of the earlier mindsets. Like I could almost see the Imperial mindset believing it's at self-transforming mindset or self-authored.
Self-author.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, well, I don't care what anybody thinks. And it's like, well, did you at one time hand your identity over to what other people think? If you never went through that, then you are not at self-authored, because self-authored comes after societal mindset. So,
well, there's a little bit of a mirror here too in level 5, self-transforming mind, that looks like number 1. Mm-hmm. There's a playfulness. There's an openness to, well, what is my identity? What is the paradox here? What's going on? I remember dipping into some of these themes and kind of loosening my rigid, this is how it all works. And my family was like, what is wrong with you? You're out of I think they thought I like reverted back to like childhood or adolescence.
Pre-trans fallacy.
Right? They're like, this kid. They saw me as a kid. It was like, this guy's nuts. Like, what is going on? And it was me trying to play with concepts that weren't as defined and constricted. Yep. And it kind of caused panic in the people around me. Just a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So I feel pretty good about going through that last order. And I know that we've gone long on the podcast.
There's no way we get to the how. Are we going to get to the how-to?
I was just going to say a really quick blitz through. Okay. How do you get from one stage to the next?
Let's sneak it in. Say it. I'm not even going to give any color commentary. You're just going to blitz through this.
Okay. All right. So how do you get somebody from stage 1 impulsive mind to stage 2 imperial mind through an exercise? And so the number one thing is you practice delayed gratification. So if there's a part of you that still is in that impulsive mind, and I think sometimes addiction will keep somebody there, or at least that part of them there, then you just set up delayed gratification practices for yourself, like waiting to respond to an emotional impulse, like answering a triggering text, right? Somebody texts you something, it gets you upset, and you just force yourself to wait in order to answer it, or reaching for a snack. Right? You just force yourself to wait before you grab that thing mindlessly.
Should I erase DoorDash off my phone?
Yeah. Probably for many reasons. All right. So that's going from stage 1 to stage 2. Or at least that's an exercise you can practice. To go from imperial mind to socialized mind, or from stage 2 to 3, identifying somebody else's needs and then acting upon them. So one way you can do that is maybe every day for a week, intentionally ask somebody, like a partner, a friend, or a colleague, what's something I can help you with today? So it's less about getting what you want, and make sure you're doing it non-transactionally. You're just doing it to give. This gets us more in a sympathetic space, and we're more likely to enter socialized mindset.
I remember driving to community college when I was like 20, and there was like a bunch of garbage cans that had been blown in the middle of the road. And I pulled over and I got out of my car. Instead of just driving around them, I got out of my car and I picked them up and I put them back on the person's driveway. Mm-hmm. And I got in the car and I started thinking, I think I'm entering society now. Like, I'm being a good citizen. I'm helping people without them even knowing it.
That's right.
I remember having that moment. That just came to me as you said that. So it could be non-person things too. Like, you could practice it in other ways to contribute, maybe without other people knowing. Find needs that need to be met around you. There's opportunity everywhere for that.
You got it. Absolutely. All right. So to go from the socialized mindset to the self-authoring mind, so from stage 3 to stage 4, or order 3 to order 4, an exercise you can do is to write your personal manifesto. right? So
Ooh.
answer questions like, what do I believe about the world? What values will I live by even if others disagree? And what is my vision for my life on my own terms? So creating your own little personal constitution, if you will. And then you can check back on it monthly. Do I still feel that way? Have I updated anything? Do I still feel like this would be my personal manifesto?
Personally, I think joining Personality Life Path Mentorship would be the best option here.
That's the best thing.
To move out of Socialized Mind and start authoring your life, because you get that systems map of your life and you figure out all your relationship to the functions. So I just want to sneak that in as a little advert in the middle of this.
But whatever you do, you're anchoring yourself to an internally chosen principle, not one of society's.
That's right.
And then to go from stage 4, the self-authoring mind, to stage 5 or order 5, the self-transforming mind, you do that by questioning your own system. So you've built and constructed the self-authored system. If you've done that work, now it's time to question the premise again. So take a belief, a value, or identity that feels rock solid and ask, in what ways might this belief be incomplete, limited, or only one piece of a bigger puzzle? So
this is what all the socionics people want you to do, Antonia.
I know they do.
Come around to socionics.
Come around to socionics.
Reevaluate Myers-Briggs.
I got to be honest. I'm not anti-socionics. I think socionics has a lot of really cool, interesting things. Like the subtypes have been very colored by it. I think the quadras are a very interesting idea. There's a lot about socionics I like. I just don't always like the advocates for it. I find sometimes the socionics people themselves are a little off-putting. So I like the system, but I don't always like the company.
I like Jesus. I just always like his followers.
Yeah, kind of. And there's nothing wrong with socionics, but yeah, you just gotta calm down, people. Calm down, socionics people. Stop getting your panties in a twist. So basically, these are, again, just to summarize, these are ways of looking at mindsets as themselves developmental, right? Like our worldview itself is developmental. And we have a tendency to get stuck in societal. And I think one of the challenges with that is that we can very easily enter into a form of tribalism. So there are disadvantages to going up the ladder. There always are. We never solve problems. We just trade them out. But one of the things about going up these higher levels, and especially to get to self-transforming, is you have so much more flexibility. There's like a calmness that comes along with not having to have all the answers, not always knowing, making peace with the feeling of uncertainty. You just sort of relax, right? There's availability for relaxation as you go up those ladders, and you don't have to like hold on to things so tightly. And there's some flexibility, and I would argue, I think actually people get closer to truth. If you're a truth seeker, truth with a capital T, I don't think it's found in the societal mindset, and I don't think it's found in the self-authored mindset. I think you're going to get much closer to it in self-transforming mindset. So if you truly are a lover of truth, sometimes you have to let go of what you think is already truth.
Yeah. But no matter what level you're at, whatever mind you're in, I mean, that's where you're at. I don't think we should feel bad or beat ourselves up. I think everybody's on a different journey developmentally. Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily a rush goal. Like by the age of 45, I'm going to get to the, you know what I mean? Like it's not, this isn't a contest.
It's not a purity test. It's not it's not like you're a bad person if you're not there already. I think it's really important. Thank you so much for making that as a good reminder. Yeah. That personal development is not about winning anything, right? It's about experiencing the world as a more authentic expression of self, right? And you don't win that, right? It's not like you said, it's not a prize. It's not a contest.
Well, I love how you frame it. Personal development is accelerated maturity, and a mature, healthy mind is a mind that has choice. Yes. And I think that's really what we're after. Yeah. Is the ability, and I mean, if you think in paradox, you have a lot of choice. Yeah. Right?
It's true.
I mean, if I can hold a paradox, I have a lot of choice within that paradox. It's a continuum that or a sliding scale I can pick and choose depending on the context. That's right. A lot of people think, oh, you're wishy-washy, you have nothing, you don't stand for anything, but it's like, I got a lot of choice, a lot of flexibility. I think that's a healthy mind. So I agree with you on that.
And just remember, if you hear somebody say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, all that person has done is already fallen for something. That's all they've done.
Fair enough. So I think whatever level you're at, I think personality types, I think my little patterning does hold. I think you can relate personality type to all of this. And certainly understanding your cognition and the building blocks of how you learn information, make decisions would be very powerful at any of these levels. So my recommendation to you, the first stop here on your journey of development or your personhood, I think a personality owner's manual for your personality type would be really beneficial here. We have one for all 16 types. You head over to personalityhacker.com. You can get one of those. They're very accessible. I think they get you started on the road. There's a bunch of stuff it covers around how to set up your life ergonomically so you can actually find flow in your life. How do you get into a growth state? How do you stop what's called looping? What about trauma grips that grip you and won't let you go and you get stuck in your traumas? How do you get out of all that stuff? How do you build a life where you have choice and you can start getting on this developmental path? Those owner's manuals are a great place to start. So head over to personalityhacker.com and pick one that is for your personality type. While you're there, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think about this conversation today? Where do you see yourself in this developmental model? What has your experience been with some of these ideas? Are you in one of these right now? Does this make sense? Come over to our website directly below this podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your story. Stories are compressed experiences, and we really love to hear them because that's where you're coming from. So let's get a discussion going. Come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and a variety of Android platforms. Please feel free to leave a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. I read every single one of them, and they're a nice little, as I've said before, adrenaline shot to the heart. We also have a video podcast you might be watching right now. It's on YouTube, Personality Hacker, and feel free to leave a comment and also like, subscribe, and hit the bell for future episodes if you'd like more of what you're reading and seeing and experiencing right now.
Are people reading right now while they're listening to us?
Well, okay, so I say that because I always read comments while I'm watching a video.
Gotcha, yes. Because you hit play and then you start reading the comments.
I can't help it. It's a sickness.
All right. Well, my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.